Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a city that never quite agreed on what time it was. Picture yourself arriving in 17th century Istanbul by boat, the Bosphorus mist curling around you like half-awake dreams. The water slaps gently against the hull, and a gull screams overhead. Not exactly the soothing start you expected, but don't worry, it'll get calmer. Ahead, the skyline bristles with domes and minarets, their silhouettes melting into the dawn haze. And just off to the left, almost hiding between taller, grander buildings, you spot it, the Galata Clock Tower. It isn't tall enough to be proud, nor ornate enough to be royal. It's squat, a little lopsided, with a bell that looks like it borrowed its clapper from a farm cow. You can already tell this tower has stories to tell, even if it tells them a few minutes late. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, post your location and what time it is where you are right now. Istanbul's towers might argue with your answer, but I promise I won't. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the docks, breathing in a mix of sea salt, horse sweat, and roasting chestnuts. The air is alive with shouts in Turkish, Greek, Armenian, Arabic, a city where the world's languages rub shoulders like impatient ferry passengers. Somewhere far off, a muezzin calls for prayer. At nearly the same moment, the Galata Tower's bell clangs with a sound halfway between a warning and an apology. It's supposed to be sunrise, but according to that bell, you're running late already. Not that anyone here agrees what time it is. Historians still argue whether these early Ottoman clock towers were ever expected to keep true time, or if they were just decorative markers of the empire's new fascination with mechanical precision. Either way, the locals glance at the bell and then go on as before, because they know better than to trust it. You make your way closer, the cobblestones uneven under your boots. The tower squats by a bustling square, not far from the Genoese-built Galata Tower that actually looks majestic. This one feels like its homely cousin, the one invited to the party because it can count, but not very well. Its wooden door hangs crookedly, iron hinges squeaking when the wind blows just right. On the hour, or maybe not quite on it, the bell gives a lazy thud that startles pigeons into flight. A merchant leaning against a cart mutters that it's running slow again, then shrugs. In a city where prayer times are marked by the sun, time doesn't need to be fixed, just roughly agreed upon. This tower, it seems, struggles even with roughly. As you circle the building, you notice the clock face itself. Painted numbers, a little faded, hands that look like they were repurposed from a pair of ornate spoons. The legend says the first mechanical clocks in the Ottoman Empire came as gifts from European diplomats hoping to impress the Sultan. Apparently this one was a diplomatic gift that got slightly lost in translation. The workmanship is fine, yes, but it doesn't quite know what to do with Istanbul's fluid sense of time, where daily rhythms are tied to the 5 calls to prayer, not to rigid hourly slices. One quirky tidbit claims that on windy days, the mechanism would slow as dust clogged its gears, leaving it 10-20 minutes behind until someone climbed up to scold it back into motion. You pause at the base and tilt your head back. The bell looks heavy, like it could wake the entire neighborhood if it wanted to. But it never does. Instead, it lingers on the edge of being helpful, a background murmur to the city's own pulse. Some travelers wrote in their journals that the Ottoman clock towers always seemed reluctant, as if Istanbul itself refused to be measured by little metal teeth and springs. Others argued these towers were bold experiments, bridging worlds between traditional timekeeping, like water clocks and candle markers, and the imported European obsession with exactness. Historians still debate whether the Sultan himself encouraged these clocks as signs of modernity, or tolerated them the way you tolerate a friend who insists on showing you their latest confusing gadget. Leaning against a worn wall, you let the square sounds wash over you. The hawkers selling figs, the children playing knucklebones, the faint bleating of a goat somewhere in a side alley. And above it all, the lazy clock hand sweeps forward, almost determined to catch up with real time, maybe by tomorrow morning. You smile to yourself. This is a city with no hurry to fall in line, a city whose clocks tell stories as crooked as their bells. And for now, that's all you need to know. You're in Istanbul, and time itself has decided to nap. You leave the squat Galata clock tower behind, but its lazy clang still echoes faintly as you step deeper into the labyrinth of Istanbul's alleys. The city is fully awake now, vendors arguing over fish prices, donkeys clattering past with baskets of firewood, the scent of cardamom and fresh simit bread teasing your stomach. And over it all, distant chimes. Not one set of chimes, but two, maybe three. They overlap like a confused orchestra warming up, each tower insisting it knows what time it is, each telling a slightly different story. You squint toward the sound, curiosity pulling you down a twisting path between timbered houses leaning toward each other like conspirators. Eventually, the alley spills out into a small square. There it stands, another clock tower, taller than the Galata one, slimmer, with ornate brickwork curling around its base like a miniature palace. The dial is larger, the numbers more confident, as if this tower believes in itself. Its bell rings sharply as you approach, announcing what it thinks is the hour. A man selling roasted chestnuts shakes his head, muttering under his breath, "Fast again." You're starting to sense a pattern here. Historians still argue whether these competing towers were built to standardize time or to show off neighborhood prestige. Some say each wealthy patron wanted their own tower ringing louder, earlier, or more impressively than the next quarters. Others believe the city's imams and astronomers resisted the European-style hours, leading to half-hearted compromises. Mechanical clocks that still bowed to the rhythms of prayer times. Whatever the reason, it's clear Istanbul in this era had no universal clock. Just shifting interpretations and a lot of arguments about being late for dinner. You followed the chimes around the square, past men huddled over backgammon boards, children skipping stones toward the fountain. The sound seems to compete with the nearby muezzin's melodic call to prayer. The muezzin wins every time. His voice is warm, human, tethered to the sun's position, while the tower clangs cold metal that feels out of step with nature. You imagine people trying to plan their day by both signals. Wake when the sun rises, pray by its arcs across the sky, and then supposedly arrive somewhere at the top of the hour, a phrase no one can agree on. A missed ferry here, a late delivery there. It's chaos, but the kind of gentle chaos that makes life feel alive. You pass a pair of scholars debating in the shade of the tower. One gestures at the clock, exclaiming that European mechanisms are miracles, destined to bring order to this city of 7 hills. The other scoffs, arguing that mechanical time is an illusion, flawed from its first tick, while true time is measured in the shifting heavens and the call to prayer. Besides, the second scholar chuckles, this one gains 3 minutes before breakfast and loses 5 by sunset. What order is that? You don't need to speak Ottoman Turkish perfectly to get the gist. Their hand-waving says it all. There's a quirky rumor the locals love to share about this tower. Some nights, they say, the chimes ring not on the hour, but seemingly at random, a pattern matching nothing in particular, except maybe the schedule of a nearby coffeehouse owner's cat who prefers her midnight snack at unpredictable times. Whether that's truth or just neighborhood mischief, nobody knows. Historians still debate whether mechanical failures were truly frequent or just exaggerated in travelers' tales to mock Ottoman attempts at European precision. Either way, you catch yourself smiling, imagining a city where cats rule the hours. You lean against a stone pillar, feeling the warmth of the sun, listening as the tower strikes again. Somewhere behind you, another chime answers, slower, deeper, like a sleepy rival. And above both, the muezzin calls once more, softening the whole cacophony into a lullaby of layered time signals. You glance upward, the sky vast and blue, the sun marking its perfect arc. You realize that no matter how many towers spring up, Istanbul belongs to the sun and to its human rhythms, not to clockwork teeth. And yet, you keep following the chimes, like a moth after lantern light, curious to find where this peculiar contest of hours will take you next. You wander on, the dueling chimes fading behind you, replaced by the low hum of conversation and the steady creak of carts rolling over cobblestones. The air grows heavier here, steep streets leading you upward toward a quieter corner of Istanbul. Someone has painted a wooden sign above a crooked doorway, a tiny clock face, its hands pointing in opposite directions as if even it has given up on accuracy. This, you suspect, is where the sound of the tower above originates, not from divine mechanisms, but from a single, tired man trying his best to keep up with the city's shifting hours. You duck through the doorway and into the watchmaker's workshop. The smell hits first: oil, brass, and something faintly singed, like too hot tea left on the stove. Shafts of sunlight cut across shelves stacked with gears, springs, and half-disassembled pocket watches sent by hopeful merchants. The man himself sits hunched over a low bench, his back curved like a question mark. He peers through a cloudy lens, tweezers trembling as he adjusts a gear no larger than a fingernail. When he notices you, he blinks slowly, then gives a nod that says, "You're welcome to watch, but don't touch anything unless you fancy losing a finger to tiny cogs." This, you suspect, is where the sound of the tower above originates, not from divine mechanisms, but from a single tired man trying his best to keep up with the city's shifting hours. Historians tell us that Ottoman clockmaking in this era was a patchwork craft. Mechanical timepieces had arrived from Europe, mostly Italian and German designs, but local artisans adapted them with the tools they had. Brass cut by hand, weights filled with sand or lead shot, lubrication improvised from olive oil. It worked, mostly, but not with the ruthless precision the Europeans bragged about. And yet there was pride here. Every tooth on every gear bore a little flourish, a crescent moon or a tiny tulip pattern. Artistry where other cultures would have insisted on standardization. The city's clocks weren't just machines, they were living sculptures, trying to tame the day without breaking its poetry. The watchmaker offers you a strange tidbit. Sometimes the tower has to be persuaded awake. He says, "If the gears are sulking, you give them a lullaby." And with surprising delicacy, he hums a folk tune as he adjusts a spring. Somewhere above, the tower's bell gives a single apologetic clink. You can't tell if it's coincidence or genuine mechanical gratitude, but either way, it feels oddly intimate, like time here is negotiated, not dictated. You let your eyes roam the cramped space. A broken hourglass rests on a shelf, half its sand spilled and swept into a jar. A sketch of a water clock, dated decades earlier, hangs beside a rough plan for a new kind of escapement mechanism that the watchmaker swears will finally beat those smug Venetians. Historians still debate whether Ottoman clockmakers were truly behind their European counterparts or simply preferred different priorities. Beauty over accuracy, flexibility over rigidity. One thing is clear, standing in this workshop. The tower above isn't failing. It's living by Istanbul's own rhythm. The watchmaker notices your wandering gaze and gives a crooked smile. Everyone wants exact hours now, he says, but exact hours make men impatient. The sun is patient. Why aren't we? You don't have an answer. Instead, you watch as he winds a long cable on a wooden reel, the chain groaning, the tick-tock above you smoothing out, falling back into something like consistency. Outside, faintly, the bell chimes. Not the precise mark of European cities, but a sound that feels warmer, more human, like it's announcing tea time, or maybe time to nap, whichever suits you. You step out again into the street, leaving the workshop behind. The city seems to stretch wider after that tiny, intimate room. You imagine every clock tower in Istanbul tethered to someone like him, a craftsman making time by hand, with humor, patience, and a song when needed. You glance up at the tower above, its crooked hands pointing to an hour you know is wrong, yet it feels right somehow. Time here isn't a tyrant. It's a companion, occasionally grumpy, sometimes late, but never cold. And you keep walking, thinking that maybe it's not the clocks that are peculiar. Maybe it's our expectation that time should ever be perfectly tamed. You leave the watchmaker's workshop behind, wandering back toward the wider streets where the city feels like it breathes in slow, uneven sighs. The Bosphorus breeze tugs at your sleeves, carrying with it the smell of fish, baking bread, and something sweet, maybe honey-drizzled lokma being fried somewhere nearby. Istanbul feels timeless, and yet everywhere you turn, another tower insists on telling you what time it supposedly is. This time, though, your path takes you past the sprawling walls of Topkapi Palace, where the Sultan himself, centuries ago, dreamt of ordering this chaotic city into a single harmonious rhythm. You pause near the palace gates, their towering arch casting cool shade over the stone path. Behind them, tiled courtyards glitter in blues and golds, guarded by silent, stern-faced janissaries. Somewhere inside, long ago, the Sultan issued a decree: build clock towers across the city, mark the hours like the Europeans do, show the world that the Ottoman Empire was as modern as any of its rivals. It was a dream of precision, of order imposed on the jumble of alleys and bazaars, of uniting prayer times, trade schedules, and military drills under the same ticking heart. But as you stand there, watching a stray cat slink across the sunlit square, you can almost hear the whispered doubts of his advisors. Historians still argue whether the Sultan truly cared about hours and minutes, or if these towers were mostly for show, grand gestures meant to impress foreign diplomats and envoys from Venice or Paris. Some chronicles claim the Sultan himself rarely glanced at a clock, preferring astrologers and celestial charts to any mechanical mechanism. Others suggest he hoped the towers would discipline a city famous for its meandering pace, where coffeehouse debates could stretch across entire afternoons and no one cared what the bell said anyway. You imagine the Sultan pacing in his private chambers, an ornate European clock ticking on the shelf, a gift from some Habsburg emissary. The story goes that he found the ticking unnerving, like a woodpecker trapped behind glass. Yet he couldn't quite ignore the power of it. The way European cities ran on strict schedules, their cannons firing exactly at noon, their markets opening with clockwork certainty. Istanbul, meanwhile, still trusted the sun, the stars, and the voices of muezzins to tell time. And so clock towers began to sprout like uncertain saplings in a forest that never asked for them. You walk a little further, past a garden where fountains murmur and peacocks strut lazily. A guide, one of those energetic storytellers who makes his living from curious travelers like you, leans against a marble column, spinning a tale about the Sultan's ambition. According to him, the dream was to create a city that could rival Paris for punctuality, where even the ferries and caravanserais would run like clockwork. It never worked, the guide says with a grin, because here even the stars prefer a slower dance. He winks, adding that no two towers ever agreed on the same hour, no matter how many decrees the palace sent out demanding synchronization. The story gets a laugh from his little crowd. It feels true, even if embellished. There's a quirky rumor that the Sultan once ordered the main clock tower to strike loudly enough to be heard in the harem's secluded courtyards, hoping to keep the palace on a tighter schedule. But the sound terrified the Sultan's prized parrots, who refused to speak for days afterward. After that, the bell was dampened, and time inside the palace returned to its usual dreamy flow. Whether this story is fact or playful gossip, historians still debate. But it says a lot about how these towers struggled to command a city and a court that refused to live by mechanical rules. You lean against a low wall, gazing out at the city beyond the palace gardens. Dozens of rooftops rise and fall like waves, and here and there you can spot another clock tower, each one stubbornly keeping its own version of truth. The Sultan's dream of a united, ordered Istanbul feels fragile in this view, like a sandcastle in a tide of human rhythm and chaos. And yet, something about it is charming. The empire tried to catch time, to cage it in gears and springs, but time here slips through fingers like warm sunlight. The palace bell rings somewhere behind you, not on the hour, not quite in harmony with the others you've heard, but with a gentle, resigned tone, as if the city is laughing softly at its ruler's grand, impossible dream. You keep walking, the sound fading into the breeze, wondering if anyone in this city ever truly believed they could make time behave. Your path curves away from the palace, leading you downhill toward the waterfront, where the Golden Horn glitters in late afternoon sunlight. The city's heartbeat is louder here. Ships creaking, seagulls cackling, the hum of trade as caravans meet the sea. This is where the empire gathers its treasures: Persian silk, Indian spices, Venetian glass, Anatolian honey, and every other good the known world can squeeze into a crate. And towering above one busy dockside square stands a clock tower you can smell before you even see it. It's not perfume or incense that reaches your nose, it's tar, fish oil, and wood smoke, the signature scent of Istanbul's commercial lifeblood.
The tower rises like a proud, soot-streaked sentinel, taller than the ones you've seen before, but battered by sea winds. Its clock face is stained with salt, its hands rusted orange, but it keeps on turning. Merchants bustle underneath, glancing up now and again, not for prayer times, not even for appointments, but for the rhythm of trade itself. They call this one the harbor clock, built under the watchful eye of the guilds that controlled shipping and warehousing. Historians still argue whether it was a local initiative or a direct order from the Sultan. But one thing is certain, this clock tried harder than most to actually keep consistent time. Cargo schedules depended on it, or at least they were supposed to. You watch as a Greek captain curses in his mother tongue, swearing the clock ran slow this morning and made him miss the favorable tide. A Turkish merchant argues back that the clock is fine, his crew just loaded too slowly. Neither seems convinced, and the clock above keeps ticking indifferently, the metal teeth inside gnashing at the city's attempts to be orderly.
A curious tidbit clings to this tower's history. On foggy days, its bell was said to go silent, not because the mechanism failed, but because it didn't want to cause chaos. Ships already struggled to navigate in low visibility. Random bell strikes would only confuse captains relying on sound to avoid collisions. Was it superstition? A humane quirk in the mechanism? Or perhaps some clever dockworker simply pulled the chain to mute it? Historians debate the story endlessly, though most agree it says more about Istanbul's sailors than about any clock's personality. You weave between bales of wool and crates of lemons, feeling the chaotic energy of the docks, where time matters differently than in the palace or the mosque. Here, every minute can mean a profit or a loss, but only the sea decides who wins. A weathered Italian trader leans against a barrel near you, sipping coffee thick as mud, and mutters that Istanbul's clocks are as fickle as the Bosphorus current. They pretend to be in charge, but the water laughs at them. He raises his cup in mock salute to the tower. The bell strikes while you stand there. 3 deep clangs, sharp enough to make the gulls scatter. Is it 3 in the afternoon? Maybe. The sun feels higher, but who are you to argue with iron and gears? Around you, men begin shouting new departure orders. Porters hurry with ropes and sails, and for a brief, fleeting moment, it seems like the clock really does run this place. Then a loud splash interrupts the orderliness as someone drops a crate overboard, and chaos returns, as natural here as the tide. One more detail catches your eye. Carved into the stone near the tower's base are faint etchings. Ships, fish, a rough outline of a clock face surrounded by waves. Dock workers over the years left their marks, claiming time as part of their trade. They didn't build this tower to rule their lives. They built it as another tool, like a compass or a sturdy anchor. Time here is practical, gritty, soaked in salt water. It bends to the needs of labor, not royal dreams or philosophical arguments. You lean against a bollard, watching as the harbor clock ticks on. Honest, if imperfect, a reminder that this city's many towers don't just disagree with each other, they also belong to different worlds. The palace tries to control time. The mosques sanctify it. The harbor negotiates with it like a hard bargain. And you just stand there, letting the sun warm your face, thinking that maybe Istanbul doesn't have peculiar clocks. It has peculiar ideas of what time is supposed to do. And when the bell strikes again, you don't even bother counting. Here, hours feel like water slipping through your fingers, impossible to hold, yet always moving. The waterfront energy fades behind you as you climb a winding street away from the docks. The city quiets a little, replaced by the soft rustle of laundry swaying from balconies and the occasional bleat of a goat being stubborn about its tether. You're heading toward one of Istanbul's lesser-known districts, a place travelers rarely write about in their journals. Locals call it the Timekeeper's Quarter, though no official map bothers to give it that name. Here, tucked between tea houses and spice shops, you'll find the clock towers that didn't quite make it into the history books, the half-forgotten ones, leaning, creaking, sometimes chiming out of tune like old friends singing sea shanties long after the boat has sailed. The first tower you stumble across barely qualifies as a tower anymore. It's a squat, lopsided brick structure built into the corner of a market building, its once grand clock face now covered with ivy. The hands are stuck forever at 1/4 something. Nobody can say when it stopped working. An old woman selling figs beneath it shrugs when you ask, murmuring that the tower decided time was no longer worth keeping. The way she says it, you half believe the story. Historians still argue whether many of these dead clocks were victims of poor engineering, lack of upkeep, or simply bad luck with Istanbul's salty, humid air. Whatever the cause, these towers remind you that the city's relationship with time has always been fragile. A few streets later, you encounter another forgotten tower, this one perched over a long-abandoned caravanserai. Its gears must still have some life in them, because every now and then a rusty clang echoes down the alley. But it's never the right hour. A local boy playing marbles nearby explains proudly that the tower tells secret time, a schedule only the pigeons understand. Sure enough, a flock circles overhead, landing precisely when the bell clangs again. Is it superstition, coincidence, or just childish fancy? Historians would scoff at the tale, but you prefer the idea that a clock could dedicate itself to birds rather than merchants. You wander on, noticing how every forgotten tower carries layers of stories like peeling paint. A burned-out candle stug rests in one window, hinting someone once tried to fix the mechanism at night. Carved graffiti from decades ago, hearts, initials, crude sketches of boats or tulips, claims ownership of time long after its keepers abandoned it. One tower even has a grapevine crawling right up to the bell, as if nature decided to strangle time itself. There's something soothing about it, almost hopeful. These clocks may be broken, but the city never stopped without them. A peculiar rumor floats among the tea houses here. They say there's a lost Ottoman clock tower buried beneath a bakery, forgotten after an earthquake shifted the neighborhood centuries ago. According to the story, on certain nights, when the moon is bright and the streets are empty, you can hear its bell faintly ringing underground. Some swear it's not a ghost story, but a real mechanical wonder, still ticking away in the dark, marking hours no one observes. Historians debate the plausibility, of course. Could a clock really survive untouched for that long? But the rumor persists, passed between sleepy old men over endless glasses of chai.
As you stroll through this quarter, you realize these forgotten towers tell a different history of Istanbul than the grand ones near the palace or the harbor. They show a city that experimented, failed, patched things up, let them fail again, and didn't seem too worried about perfection. People here learned to live without rigid schedules, even as iron hands circled overhead or stopped completely. The rhythm of life was always set by the sun, the market's mood, the length of a conversation, or the aroma of bread cooling on a windowsill, not by gears and weights. You pause under one particularly crooked tower, its shadow stretching long in the fading light. The bell is silent, probably rusted solid. A cat sprawls across its base, yawning with the confidence of a creature that knows time has no real hold over it. And in that moment, you think maybe these forgotten towers are the most honest of all. They tried to measure the unmeasurable, then gave up gracefully, surrendering time back to the city where it belongs. You move on slowly, your footsteps matching the unhurried pace of this neighborhood. No chimes chase you now, just the soft sounds of everyday life, spoons clinking against tea glasses, fabric snapping on clotheslines, quiet laughter drifting from a courtyard. In the timekeeper's quarter, time has melted into something gentler, and even you feel lighter for it, as if you've stepped outside the rule of hours for a little while. You wake the next morning to the city's usual cacophony, a blend of muezzin calls, ship horns, and 100 different bells all insisting they know the hour better than the others. Today, your feet carry you toward a district where those bells were once not just instruments of order, but of power. Here, the towers were never purely about marking time. They were loudspeakers for authority, reminders that the empire could make even the sun bow to its rules, or at least try. The first of these commanding towers looms over a wide square where old cannonballs still rest as decorative markers, silent relics of long-past parades and military musters. The tower's base is fortified, thick walls pocked with arrow slits from a bygone age. Above, the clock face is painted in bold colors, far brighter than most, and you learn why from a street vendor selling sesame bread. This was where the soldiers drilled. You couldn't mistake the hour, not unless you fancied running laps in full armor. You picture janissaries jogging around the square because the tower chimed late, their boots pounding in time with the next bell. A funny image now, though surely less amusing to them back then. Historians record that certain Ottoman clock towers were built specifically to enforce punctuality for the military and government offices. Before mechanical clocks, war councils relied on sundials and water clocks, prone to cloudy delays or frozen pipes in winter. With towers like this, an unmistakable clang could ripple through the garrison, marking time for drills, meetings, even curfews. Yet these towers were far from perfect. One scribe wrote, "We keep missing dawn because the clock lingers in its dreams," a poetic way to say it ran slow. One quirky detail you overhear from a local historian lounging on a bench nearby. This very tower was said to have a lazy bell ringer, not a man, but a misaligned hammer in the clockwork that occasionally missed its mark, causing entire regiments to arrive late to ceremonial events. Was it mechanical failure or deliberate sabotage? Historians still argue, but you imagine a mischievous apprentice watchmaker smirking in his grave centuries later at the chaos his mistake caused. As you wander further, you find another commanding tower, this one more sinister in vibe. Its face is carved with stern calligraphy reading, "Time is the Sultan's servant." Locals swear that during certain reigns, this tower's bell marked not only the hours, but the start of public announcements, sometimes joyous, sometimes grim. A clang here could mean new laws, new taxes, or occasionally an execution at the far end of the square. The tower became a nervous metronome for the city's power games, making time feel like something that could punish as well as guide. And yet, even these towers couldn't tame Istanbul's soul. You pass a faded mural on one tower's base, a crude caricature of a janissary asleep under the bell, oblivious to the strike above his head. Maybe the artist risked their life for the joke, or maybe officials themselves laughed and let it be. Either way, it says something unspoken, that time imposed from above was always met with a shrug, a smile, or outright mockery by the people who lived under its tolling shadow. You pause in the square, watching the current tower's hands crawl toward the next hour. When it strikes, the sound is deep, resonant, a little threatening, yet pigeons still scatter in every direction, unimpressed by its authority. Life continues immediately afterward, merchants hawking fruit, children darting between carts, old men arguing about nothing important. The empire could build towers as commanding as it liked, but the city's heartbeat never quite obeyed. Walking away, you glance back one last time at the painted clock face, its bright colors dulled by centuries of sun and smoke. It feels like a relic of ambition, of rulers trying to synchronize a city that preferred to set its own pace. Power tried to march in time, but the streets always danced instead. And you keep thinking, as the alley swallows you up, how peculiar it is that even the mightiest empire couldn't get all its clocks to agree, not even when the penalty for tardiness could be a few too many laps in heavy boots or a royal glare capable of chilling blood. Maybe time simply doesn't like to be bossed around. You leave the commanding towers behind, their heavy chimes echoing faintly as you make your way through a maze of back streets. Istanbul has so many layers, it feels like walking through overlapping centuries. Roman stones under Ottoman arches, under new apartments with satellite dishes. Today's path takes you toward the towers that belonged neither to sultans nor soldiers, but to merchants who made their fortunes counting coins rather than minutes, yet still felt compelled to build monuments to time. Some call them the merchants' clocks, and they tell stories not of power or piety, but of bargains struck and sometimes broken. The first you spot rises over a narrow street where the smell of roasted coffee and freshly ground spices drifts like a comforting fog. Its clock face is ornate but practical, painted with zodiac signs as well as hours. A coffee seller explains that this tower was built by a guild of Persian traders who believed the stars were better timekeepers than gears alone. You could buy peppercorns priced by the hour or the constellation, he says, with a grin, handing you a steaming cup so strong it could wake a sleeping donkey. Historians still argue whether the tower's astrological design actually influenced market schedules, or if it was simply decorative whimsy that made outsiders think Ottoman trade ran on cosmic logic.
Further along, you encounter a more peculiar sight, a tower that leans noticeably, as if a stiff breeze might send it into the street. Legend has it, a wealthy Greek merchant built it taller than regulations allowed, hoping his clock would dominate competitors' towers nearby. The foundations couldn't handle the extra weight, so it tilted gradually over decades. Instead of fixing it, the city embraced it. Merchants began joking that time is crooked here, just like our deals, and the saying stuck, becoming a kind of proud motto for the district. Whether that particular merchant got richer or poorer for his ambition, nobody remembers, but the tower still slants dramatically, frozen in defiant imperfection. A third tower surprises you with its silence. Its bell hasn't rung in generations, yet the clock face turns dutifully. A carpet seller tells you the guild responsible once agreed to stop striking the hour altogether after a near riot in the marketplace. Apparently, in the early days, merchants tried to charge different prices depending on the precise minute of sale, raising costs as noon approached when trade was brisk. Customers eventually revolted, smashing scales and shouting that clocks shouldn't rule their purses. The compromise was struck. The tower could keep time silently, but its bell would never again command the market. You can still almost hear the ghost of that old argument echoing among the stalls. Historians like to say these towers were Istanbul's answer to the European idea that time is money. Yet they also show how slippery that equation was here. Deals were made on handshakes and long cups of tea, not just by the tick of a clock. You stand at a cafe table under one of these towers, sipping something sweet and hot, watching merchants haggle over carpets with patient shrugs, taking as long as they need. Above them, the clock hands circle, ignored until, maybe, someone needs to catch a ferry. The city seems to say, clocks are useful, yes, but only if they serve the people, not the other way around. One curious tidbit you overhear from an elderly bookseller. Apparently, some merchant towers were rumored to have secret compartments where guild leaders stored emergency funds, or, more scandalously, bribes meant for inspectors. Whether true or not, the story fits this neighborhood's aura of deals and counterdeals, where time was just another bargaining chip. You wander a bit more, touching the warm stone of one tower as you pass. It feels solid, yet worn, its edges polished smooth by centuries of hands, doing exactly what you're doing now, pausing, leaning, thinking. These towers weren't built to awe or terrify. They were part of the daily fabric of life, practical yet proud. They didn't demand you obey time, only that you notice it when convenient. A strangely liberating thought. As you turn toward the next alley, the crooked tower catches your eye again, leaning into the late afternoon sun like it's listening to some secret joke the other towers missed. You smile, realizing this city might not run like clockwork, but somehow it runs just fine. The sun dips lower as you leave the merchant's quarter behind, following the city's winding arteries toward a neighborhood where stone walls give way to gardens, wooden houses, and the soft smell of clay baking in the sun. Here, the city feels quieter, more personal. Instead of guilds or sultans, these clock towers were built by ordinary communities, fishermen, artisans, even small religious brotherhoods, each claiming their own slice of time. These are the neighborhood clocks, peculiar in design and purpose, often as whimsical as they are practical. The first one you stumble upon is barely taller than a two-story house. Its clock face is painted in faded blue, surrounded by cheerful tulip motifs. A boy plays marbles beneath it, while his grandmother knits nearby.
When you ask about it, she tells you this clock once rang to remind the fishermen to return before the tide turned, long before anyone had a reliable tide table. Sometimes it struck too early, sometimes too late, but the boats usually came home safe. Historians still argue whether the bell helped save lives or just startled seagulls. But the locals cherish it, swearing the tower watches over their families even now. A few streets away, another tower surprises you with its decorations. Instead of numbers, its face has 12 little clay plates, each painted by children generations ago. Each hour, a wooden bird pops out and pecks at one of the plates before retreating inside again. The mechanism doesn't work as smoothly as it once did. The bird sticks for a second before jerking free, but the kids gathered around giggle every time it appears. You can't help but grin too, imagining how a group of proud parents once pooled their savings to build a clock that doubled as a toy for their children. It wasn't about strict schedules here. It was about giving the neighborhood something to delight in. Further along, you find a tower that tells a slightly sadder story. Its bell is missing entirely, replaced by a simple hand-painted sign reading, "Time is what you make of it." According to a local shopkeeper, the bell was taken down during a famine centuries ago, melted for metal to craft tools for farming. The clock's hand still turned faithfully, but without a sound. Some say the neighborhood grew closer after that, relying on each other rather than bells to know when to gather, eat, or pray. You run your fingers over the weathered sign, feeling the faint grooves of letters made by someone who clearly believed their words would last longer than a chime. One curious tidbit you overhear in a tea shop. Apparently, there's a vanished neighborhood tower that once struck not with a bell, but with a whistle powered by steam from a communal bathhouse. Old men argue over whether it actually worked or if it just filled the street with damp hissing noise and confused everyone about the hour. Historians remain divided, unsure if it was a genuine innovation or a centuries-old urban legend. Either way, the thought of a steamy clock misting the streets on chilly mornings makes you laugh quietly into your cup. What strikes you most as you wander here is how these neighborhood clocks seem to belong to the people, not the other way around. They're not monuments of power or tools of commerce, they're companions, witnesses to births, weddings, fires, and feasts. Their paint flakes, their gears stick, their birds hiccup, and nobody minds. Time isn't a tyrant here. It's a neighbor, just another resident of the street, sometimes late, sometimes early, but always present. You linger under the tulip-painted clock again before leaving, watching as the bell strikes softly, almost apologetically, to mark the evening. A few windows light up, and someone calls children home for dinner. The smell of fresh bread drifts from a nearby oven. You realize this is how time has always truly worked in a city like Istanbul. Not carved into stone edicts or etched on royal decrees, but carried in smells, sounds, and familiar rituals. These little towers just remind everyone of what they already know in their bones. As twilight settles over the neighborhood, you feel strangely comforted. Time here doesn't chase you. It walks beside you, gently, like a friend guiding you home. Night has properly settled over Istanbul now, casting the city in a soft, silvery glow. Oil lamps flicker in windows. Narrow streets glint like threads of dark silk. And somewhere in the distance, a tower bell rings. Not to tell the hour, but to call the faithful to prayer. Tonight, you're wandering towards some of the most mystical clock towers in the city, ones built not for power, not for profit, but for faith. These are the devotional towers, where time was not just measured, but sanctified. The first you find stands beside a modest mosque, its clock face partly hidden by the branches of an old olive tree. Its hands point toward midnight, yet the tower hums faintly with life, gears still turning, oil faintly scented with frankincense from the nearby prayer hall. A caretaker sweeping the courtyard explains that this clock was built to mark the hours of prayer for a Sufi brotherhood that once gathered here centuries ago. But unlike other towers, it doesn't simply strike the hours, it sings them. At dawn, its chimes used to echo like a flute, soft and lilting, gently waking the faithful. Historians still argue whether the mechanism was truly musical or if memory has softened the sound with time. But you prefer to imagine it. A clock that didn't command you to rise, but coaxed you awake with melody. Further down a quiet alley, you encounter a tower decorated entirely in intricate geometric patterns. This one belonged to an order of astronomer monks, devoted to charting the heavens and aligning earthly life with divine order. Its clock didn't just tell hours, it predicted the phases of the moon, guiding the start and end of Ramadan for the neighborhood. Locals say the mechanism was astonishingly precise, ahead of its time by centuries. But there's a curious debate among historians. Some claim its accuracy depended on hidden human adjustments at night, meaning the perfect clock may have been part machine, part devoted watchman, climbing the tower in secret to nudge the hands when the stars disagreed with the gears. The most peculiar devotional clock you visit tonight doesn't even have a face. It's just a tall, slender spire with a single suspended bell. According to a soft-spoken dervish you meet nearby, this bell once chimed only when the muezzin was delayed or lost his voice, keeping the faithful from missing prayer times. It became known as the clock of compassion, existing not to rule time, but to protect it, a fail-safe for human error in a divine schedule. The bell hasn't rung in living memory, but the dervish swears that in certain winds you can hear a ghostly ring, as though time still remembers being kind here. One quirky legend clings to another nearby tower. Supposedly, it had a mechanism that only struck the hour if at least 3 people were gathered in prayer. Otherwise, it stayed silent. The tale may be apocryphal, but the story carries a quiet truth about these places. Time only mattered if it brought people together, not if it marched alone. As you wander beneath these towers, you notice how different they feel from the others you've seen. The military clocks barked orders. The merchants' towers haggled over minutes. The sultan's clocks displayed grandeur. But these devotional towers whisper. They seem to measure not just hours, but moments of stillness, humility, longing. You hear footsteps approaching softly on a nearby cobblestone lane, followed by the low murmur of evening prayer inside a mosque. There's no urgency here, only rhythm, a cadence that feels older than the city itself. You pause outside the musical tower one last time, looking up through the branches of the olive tree. The mechanism gives a faint, sleepy tick. A breeze stirs, carrying the scent of jasmine, and for a heartbeat, you imagine you hear the ghost of that flute-like chime drifting over rooftops and mingling with the sigh of the Bosporus. Time doesn't just pass in this part of Istanbul, it bends, sways, sometimes even sings. As you walk away toward the next district, you catch yourself moving more slowly, as though you've been tuned to a different clock altogether, a clock that counts not the hours, but the moments that matter. You leave the devotional towers behind, their imagined flute chimes fading into the distance as you climb a steep cobbled street. The air feels different up here, brisker, tinged with salt from the Bosphorus and soot from countless ship chimneys. Ahead, you spot a jagged skyline of masts and rigging against the stars. This is the harbor district, where clocks once ruled not hearts or prayers, but sails and anchors. These are the maritime towers, built to tame the unpredictable tempo of the sea. The first tower you encounter stands on a promontory overlooking the Golden Horn, its base worn smooth by salt winds and centuries of sailors leaning against it while waiting for departure calls. The clock face is cracked, but still legible, its hands thick as anchor chains. A grizzled ferryman, sitting nearby mending his net, tells you the story. This clock once told every hour on the half, to warn captains of incoming tides and to signal ferry schedules long before harbor masters had megaphones or telegraphs. Saved more than a few drunk captains from missing their own ships, the ferryman says, eyes twinkling. Historians still argue whether these signals genuinely improved punctuality or just provided convenient excuses for delays. The clock didn't chime, so of course we were late. Further along, you find a strange tower-like construction with two clock faces, one for local Ottoman time, another for what sailors called Venetian time. This was back when Istanbul's harbor bustled with international traders and different fleets stubbornly refused to adopt the same hour system. Imagine the chaos. A Dutch captain thinks it's 3 o'clock, a Levantine crew swears it's almost sunset, and this tower stands in between, trying to keep the peace with two ticking truths. One quirky anecdote survives. Apparently, a prankster once switched the faces at night, causing an entire morning of missed shipments, furious letters, and one captain allegedly sailing in the wrong direction. Historians still argue whether the story's true, but you like the idea of time playing tricks on those who thought they controlled it. You wander closer to the docks, where a smaller, stouter tower sits beside what used to be a fish market. Instead of a bell, it had a horn powered by bellows, which blared at dawn to wake fishermen. Locals claim it sounded less like a trumpet and more like a cow in distress, earning it the nickname the sea cow clock. The mechanism's long gone, but every so often someone swears they still hear that mournful moo carried by the wind. Standing there, you try to imagine a harbor full of bleary-eyed men heaving nets to the tune of an ungodly bovine alarm clock. You laugh softly, thinking it's probably not far from the truth. Not all maritime clocks were humorous, though. One tower you glimpse in the distance, across the water, is said to have been used to coordinate lighthouse signals and cannon salutes, vital for protecting the city from surprise attacks by sea. Here, time was serious business. A mistimed bell could mean missing an enemy fleet creeping in under the cover of fog. But as with all clocks in Istanbul, precision was more aspiration than guarantee. A few records tell of moments when signals were late or early, causing brief chaos in the harbor. Historians remain divided over whether human error or fickle mechanics were to blame. You suspect the sea, forever unruly, simply refused to be ruled by gears and pendulums. As you leave the harbor district, gulls scream overhead, circling in the moonlight like restless spirits. The maritime towers you've seen tonight speak to a city trying to reconcile two very different masters, the clock and the tide. And no matter how carefully they measured, one or the other always seemed to slip away. You look back at the cracked clock on the promontory, the one with anchor chain hands, and it feels less like a machine and more like a shrug carved in stone. A reminder that time and the sea wait for no one, but they also rarely bothered to run on schedule. You stroll inland, feeling the warmth of taverns spilling onto the cobblestones, sailors laughing loud and late despite the hour. Somewhere behind you, a bell strikes twice, followed immediately by another tower chiming once more, contradicting it. A few ship horns answer in what might be agreement or mockery. In Istanbul, even the clocks can't resist arguing like sailors after too much raki. The harbor fades behind you, replaced by a tangle of steep, narrow lanes that lead toward the edges of Istanbul most travelers never think to visit. Here, past the bustling markets and beyond the glow of grand mosques, the city grows quieter, stranger. You're heading for a part of town where time was less a science and more a rumor, where clock towers were built as experiments, eccentric projects dreamed up by inventors, alchemists, and those who thought time could be bent to human will. These are the experimental towers, and they feel like stepping into someone else's half-finished dream. The first you encounter barely looks like a tower at all. It's a slim column, maybe 3 stories high, topped by what resembles a bird cage made of brass and glass. Inside, a small set of gears spins slowly, not driving clock hands, but a series of shimmering mirrors that cast patches of sunlight onto the surrounding walls. A night watchman, leaning on his cane, tells you that this was meant to be a light clock, showing the time by how beams of sunlight hit certain markers. Trouble was, Istanbul has more cloudy days than the inventor allowed for, leaving the neighborhood perpetually confused about whether they were late or the sun was just in a bad mood. Historians still debate whether this was truly a functional design or merely a rich man's fancy toy, a question never answered because the inventor disappeared after a particularly overcast winter, presumably to sunnier lands. A few streets away, you stumble on a twisted tower that seems to spiral like a corkscrew into the sky. The face is vertical instead of circular, with a single hand creeping slowly upward before dropping back to the base at midnight. Legend claims an eccentric mathematician built this one to test whether humans would perceive time differently if hours flowed vertically rather than around a circle. Supposedly, his neighbors hated it, constantly misjudging appointments and dinner times. One historian argues this story's nonsense, saying the spiral was just structural necessity on the narrow street. Another insists diaries from the 1600s mention the cursed climbing clock, lending weight to the myth. You stand there imagining how confusing it must have been to look up and see time climbing like a snail toward tomorrow. Further on, you find perhaps the strangest tower yet. It has no face, no bell, only a hollow tube that emits a faint, low hum when the wind blows through it. Locals call it the breathing clock, claiming it was built by a mystic inventor who believed time should be felt, not seen or heard. Supposedly, at certain times of day, the wind aligns with the tube's chambers, creating a deep,
resonant note that lingers in your bones. Standing under it, you do feel a faint vibration when the breeze stirs, as if the city itself is sighing. Whether it truly told time or just made people uneasy is anyone's guess. Scholars remain divided. Was it art, engineering, or madness? Perhaps all three. One curious tidbit you overhear from an old man selling roasted chestnuts nearby. There was once an experimental tower that tried to tell time with scented smoke. Cinnamon for dawn, rose for noon, sandalwood for dusk. Unfortunately, strong winds often blew the scents off course, making one street think it was lunchtime while the next believed it was evening prayers. The tower burned down in an accidental fire, leaving behind nothing but stories and a faint memory of sandalwood whenever the topic comes up. What ties these towers together is an accuracy or permanence. They're reminders of a city willing to play with time, to treat it as something malleable, curious, even humorous. Unlike the strict military clocks or solemn devotional towers, these experimental creations seem to laugh in the face of precision, turning time into a game. You lean against the spiral tower's wall for a moment, watching a stray cat chase shadows under its strange geometry, and you can't help but think the inventor would have approved of the chaos. As you move on, you glance back at the breathing clock, catching one last low hum. It feels like a heartbeat under the night sky, reminding you that even in a city obsessed with clocks, time has never truly been tamed. It breathes, it shifts, it plays tricks. And maybe that's what makes Istanbul so alive, even in the still hours before dawn. Your steps take you next into the scholarly heart of Istanbul, where minarets mingle with domed libraries, and the air smells faintly of parchment, beeswax, and ink. Here, time is not just told, it is studied, debated, argued over like a philosophical puzzle. The scholarly towers you're about to explore were built not to guide sailors or merchants, but to prove theories, to track the heavens, and sometimes to win eternal bragging rights among the learned men of the empire. The first tower you find is squat and square, standing beside a madrasa where students once recited lessons beneath lantern light. Its clock face is plain, yet beneath it sits a second dial, filled with stars, planets, and delicate silver crescents that circle slowly. A gray-bearded scholar you meet on the steps explains that this tower once served as a teaching tool for astronomy students. It tracked the movement of Jupiter and Mars alongside the hours of the day, helping scholars link earthly time with celestial order. Historians still argue whether this clock was accurate enough to truly predict planetary conjunctions, or if it mostly dazzled visiting dignitaries with spinning stars. Either way, it turned time into a dance between heaven and earth. A little further on, you find a tower that feels like it might collapse under the weight of its own equations. Every stone is etched with numerals, fractions, and arcane symbols, remnants of a 17th century attempt to build a mathematical clock that could calculate the future. Its builder, a famed polymath named Nasser Effendi, believed that by measuring time with enough precision, one could predict weather, harvests, even human behavior. Neighbors reportedly joked that his tower was better at forecasting bad moods than storms. One story claims a rival scholar snuck in one night and altered the mechanism to always chime an hour late, ruining Nasser's grand demonstration before the Sultan. Historians remain divided whether this was genuine sabotage or a tall tale told by jealous peers,
But the idea of time as a weapon in scholarly feuds is hard not to enjoy. The next tower you see is less about precision and more about philosophy. It lacks hands entirely, bearing instead a slowly turning sphere meant to symbolize eternity. Its builder supposedly wanted to remind scholars that time was infinite, that any attempt to measure it was just scratching lines in sand. Locals hated it, since nobody could tell when it was dinner. Yet over the years, it became a beloved curiosity. Even now, a student sitting in its shadow tells you it's a favorite spot for young lovers to meet, pretending to ponder infinity, while actually stealing a quiet moment away from the watchful eyes of their teachers. This district were secretly connected underground by wires or pipes, allowing them to synchronize bells across distances. If true, it would have been one of the earliest attempts at a citywide clock network, a forerunner of telegraphs and modern timekeeping. No evidence has ever been found, though, leading historians to speculate whether it was real, abandoned, or just an academic daydream scribbled in the margins of a forgotten notebook. Walking among these scholarly towers, you notice they lack the certainty of military clocks or the practical charm of neighborhood bells. They feel more like questions carved in stone, reminders that even the brightest minds couldn't fully capture time. You imagined late-night debates in coffee houses, students arguing whether time flowed or leapt, whether clocks ruled the world or merely pretended to. You picture a frazzled scholar leaning out a window, yelling at a tower that chimed early, muttering about temporal inconsistencies, while neighbors rolled their eyes. Before you leave the district, you pause at the astronomical clock again, watching its tiny silver planets turn. The slow motion feels hypnotic, pulling you into a rhythm older than human calendars. It makes you think of all the minds that once stood here, peering up at the same mechanism, wondering the same things. In this city, even the clocks can't resist asking impossible questions, as if time itself enjoys keeping scholars guessing. You step back into the street, the night air cool on your face, feeling like you've walked through centuries of curiosity made stone and gears. And somewhere behind you, a clock chimes, not to tell you what time it is, but just to remind you that you're still part of the puzzle. You drift now into a quieter quarter of the city, far from the debates of scholars and the clangor of ship bells. Here, the streets are narrower, the houses closer, and every corner feels like a secret whispered between neighbors. This is where the neighborhood towers once ruled. Not grand or experimental, but humble, built to keep the rhythm of daily life ticking in step. Time here was personal, woven into the fabric of bread ovens, children's games, and the call of street vendors. The first tower you stumble upon is barely taller than the surrounding homes. Its clock face is sun-faded, painted with delicate floral motifs that make it look more like a kitchen plate than an instrument of precision. A woman sitting outside knitting tells you it was once the baker's tower, where a bell rang to signal when communal ovens were open for bread making. She saved a lot of dough, she says with a wink, and you're not sure if she means money or flour. Historians still debate whether this was truly a unique tower or just a local variant of mosque clocks, but the idea of time measured by the readiness of bread feels undeniably cozy. Farther along, you find a tiny octagonal tower with small windows on every side. It's so low you could almost reach the bell pull yourself. This was once the children's clock, built by a philanthropic guild to mark the hours of school lessons and, more importantly, playtime.
Locals say it chimed not with a bell, but with a series of cheerful rattles and chimes, like toys in motion. A curious anecdote persists. One summer, the mechanism broke, ringing non-stop for 3 days, causing children from neighboring districts to flood the area thinking school was permanently out. Scholars argue about whether this story's true, but you can practically hear the squeals of delight echoing across time. Another tower stands near a now empty square that once hosted a lively market. Its clock has 2 small doors beneath the face, long rusted shut. Old men playing backgammon nearby tell you that every hour a little carved rooster used to pop out to crow, signaling the arrival of fresh produce carts. The mechanism, sadly, wore out in the late 19th century, and the rooster never returned. Yet people here still say, "We'll meet when the rooster crows," even though no clock has crowed in generations. It's as if time itself left behind a pet phrase to keep neighbors on schedule. You pass another modest tower that bears a painted sun and moon instead of numbers. This one helped farmers in nearby gardens track the best times to water plants and gather herbs. The quirky tidbit locals share: the tower was rumored to predict rain, its bell supposedly ringing softer before storms. Historians chalk it up to humidity affecting the bell's tone, but residents swear it was magic, a clock with weather sense. Unlike the Sultan's grand towers or the scholarly experiments, these neighborhood clocks weren't about power, prestige, or philosophy. They were about keeping life moving at a gentle, shared pace. No one fined you for being late here. If the baker's bell was slow, everyone got bread late together. If the rooster failed, the market simply started when it started. There's something deeply comforting about that communal understanding of time, where being in sync mattered more than being exact. As you continue wandering, you notice many towers have been repurposed. One houses pigeons now, feathers fluttering from broken windows. Another is painted with murals of tulips and coffee cups, a tribute to the old cafe that stood beside it. The clocks themselves may have stopped, but their stones remember. A neighborhood heartbeat that once rang out, tying together mornings, afternoons, and evenings in an unhurried song. You pause at a small fountain where water trickles softly, the only sound now that these bells have long gone silent. In this quiet corner, it feels like the city is gently reminding you that time doesn't have to march. Sometimes it can stroll, linger over coffee, laugh with children, and still keep everyone more or less where they need to be. You leave the neighborhood feeling lighter, as if those forgotten little towers have convinced you that not every minute needs a purpose. Sometimes it's enough just to let time pass together. The city feels hushed now, as if the night itself has settled in for a nap. You climb a final hill, past tangled vines and old stone walls, until you reach a small plateau. From here, Istanbul sprawls below you, its domes, minarets, and rooftops stitched together by moonlight. Scattered across the landscape are the silhouettes of every tower you've visited tonight: devotional spires, stern military posts, eccentric experiments, humble neighborhood bells. Some still stand proud, others are crumbling ruins,
Yet together they form a skyline that once pulsed with time's heartbeat. This is where you pause to reflect on the city's legacy of time. You sit on a worn bench beside the remains of one last clock tower, its face long vanished, leaving only an empty circle in the stone like a missing eye. A night breeze rustles nearby olive trees, carrying with it the faint sounds of distant bells, maybe from a surviving clock, maybe from your imagination. You realize that Istanbul never truly had one single time. Every tower, every bell, every experiment whispered its own version of the hour, sometimes aligning, often arguing. Time here wasn't a single marching rhythm, it was a chorus, a layered lullaby sung by the city itself. You think back to the scholarly towers, trying to chart eternity, to the sailors relying on clanging horns, to bakers timing bread, to mystics making time breathe through wind. Historians still debate which towers mattered most, which innovations genuinely changed the empire's flow of life. But walking through it all, you suspect the real story isn't about precision or progress. It's about a city that refused to let time be an enemy. Instead of mastering it, Istanbul befriended time, shaping it into rituals, jokes, shared mistakes, fleeting experiments, and warm memories tied to bells and gears. There's a quirky tidbit you almost missed. Locals say that on certain nights in spring, when the air is clear and the moon just right, you can hear phantom chimes drifting across the hills, an echo of every clock that ever ticked here. Skeptics call it nonsense, claiming it's just church and mosque bells blending on the breeze. But as you sit under the stars, you'd swear you hear a dozen different hours striking at once, discordant, imperfect, yet strangely soothing, like the city humming itself to sleep. Your eyelids grow heavy as you gaze over Istanbul, past and present layered in the moonlight. You picture all those long-gone clockmakers, bakers, sailors, scholars, mystics, even pranksters, leaving their mark on a city that treated time as something to be shared rather than commanded. Maybe the real magic of these towers was never about knowing the exact hour. Maybe it was about giving everyone, from emperors to street kids, a reason to look up together, to listen for the bell, to laugh when it got it wrong, to live in sync, if only for a moment. Somewhere far below, a lone bell rings. Late or early, you'll never know. But it feels right, a soft punctuation to the city's eternal story of time. The night deepens, the breeze softens. The view of Istanbul blurs as you let go of every thought about clocks, hours, schedules. There's no need for them here anymore. The city holds time gently now, like a lullaby, and you can simply drift with it. The city quiets further as you lean back on the bench, letting your gaze soften, no longer tracing rooftops or towers. The night air feels warmer now, like a blanket draped across your shoulders, carrying the faintest sense of baked bread, salt water, and spring blossoms. The hum of life that pulsed through every district tonight is fading, leaving only a slow, steady rhythm that feels older than clocks, older than the city itself. Your breathing matches it. In, out. A calm tide washing over you, each breath letting go of another thought. The towers, those peculiar storytellers of hours and minutes, seem to blur into one another in your memory, their bells overlapping into a single, soft chime far away. You don't need to hold on to details now. You don't need to know the time. It's enough to know that it's late, It's peaceful, and you are safe here. Somewhere in the distance, a breeze nudges through the olive trees, and you imagine it's the city exhaling, settling in for its own long sleep. The stars above hang still and patient, marking a different kind of time, one that doesn't rush, doesn't tick, just glows softly and endlessly. Let the last scraps of thought drift like leaves on a quiet stream. Let your body sink a little deeper into the bench, into the earth, into this timeless night. The peculiar clock towers of Istanbul have finished their story. Their bells are silent now, leaving only rest, long and easy, waiting for you to close your eyes and follow them into dreams. Good night.